Good morning, 4E. Welcome to Wednesday's math lesson. Yesterday, we learned a little bit about multiplying larger numbers. That's what our new Unit 7, is about. And we learned that when you break apart a number in expanded form and then multiply by the single digit number, you'll be able to get an answer. So, for example, one that we did yesterday, let's just review really quick. Let's say we wanted to multiply 2,579 times 3. We learned that when you break this apart into expanded form, right, 2,579 is made up of 2,570 and 9. And then you multiply each one of those by the 3. So 2,000 times 3, I'm just going to actually do it in my head because we don't need to write out the whole thing. So that would be 6,000, right? Because 2,000 times 3 is 6,000, plus 500 times 3, which is 1,500, because 5 times 3 is 15, right? So your answer would be 100 times that amount, because 500 is 100 times 5. So 1,500. And then 70 times 3 is 210. And then 9 times 3 is 27. So we learned yesterday that if you break it apart in expanded form and multiply each one and add them together, you would get the same answer as if you multiply it, let's say, by the multiplication algorithm, which we're going to learn later this week. So this would be 7,737. Okay, so today we're going to continue our study of multiplying bigger numbers, and similar to writing something in expanded form, today we're going to review rounding and how rounding can help you get an estimate for a multiplication problem. So we learned this a little bit like several months ago about rounding, but if you want to round a number, let's start with to the nearest 10. So if you have a number, let's start with 54, for example. You want to think about where would that be on the number line? And you want to think about what two tens is 54 in between. So if you have 54 on a number line, the two tens that it's in between are 50 and 60, right? Because when you count by tens, you say 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, and so on. So 55 is right in the middle. It's right in between 50 and 60, right in the middle, like in between 0 and 1, 1/2 would be right in the middle. So 55 is halfway in between. So 54, you're noticing, is closer to 50 than it is to 60. So if we had to round 54 to the nearest 10, you would round down to 50, right? So what if the number was, let's say we wanted to round 57 to the nearest 10. You want to picture in your mind what two tens is that in between. It's still in between 50 and 60, but in a 55 is right in the middle. 57 would be closer to 60. So you would round 57 up to 60 if you were rounding to the nearest 10. That's a little bit of a review from our rounding unit. Okay, so I think let's do another one. You can have your paper and pencil in front of you or a whiteboard. What if we're still going to round to the nearest 10? What if we wanted to round something that's in the hundreds but still to the nearest 10? So what if we wanted to round 216 to the nearest 10? Well, this number, if you look at it just in the tens, you look at the tens column and then the ones, that's 16, right? So 216 is in between what two tens? I'll give you a moment to think about that, and you can write it down on your paper or your whiteboard. So 216, if you're just thinking about it like 16, the two tens that's in between is 210 and 220, right? Because if you're just thinking 16, well, that would be in between 10 and 20. So what's right in the middle of 210 and 220? It would be 215, right? So now you want to think about, well, 216 would be about here. It would be a little bit past 215. So the nearest 10 is 220. So if you wanted to round this number to the nearest 10, you would round it to 220. So you round up. Let's do one more. I want you to figure out how to round this number to the nearest 10. $782. So first you think about what two tens is that in between, and which one is it closer to? You can draw your number line if you want. I like to draw that because it helps me. So this number is in between 780 and 790. So once you figure out the two tens it's in between, you realize 785 is right in the middle. So 782 is about there. And then you realize you would round down because it's closer to 780, right? So we talked about this a little bit before, but just to remind you, if the number is right in the middle, let's say I wanted to round 785 to the nearest 10, that already is right in the middle, right? So that's in between 780 and 790. And if it's the number that falls right in the middle, then you always round up. You always round up to the nearest 10. That's the rule. So that's rounding to the nearest 10. To the nearest 100, you think about we can use that same example, 785. If we wanted to round that to the nearest 100, you think about what numbers do I say when I count by hundreds? 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800, 900, 1000, right? So you think, what two hundreds is that in between? Well, it's in between 700 and 800, right? So what number would be right in the middle? What's halfway between 700 and 800? 750. So then you can figure out, well, I'm realizing 785 is closer to 800 than it is to 700. Does that make sense? So for today, you're going to estimate, you're going to learn how to estimate multiplication answers by rounding. So, and you're also going to need to know how to round to the nearest 1,000. So let's try 2,175. How can we round that to the nearest 1,000? So same rule applies here as if you're rounding to the nearest 10, 100, or 1,000. You figure out, well, what two thousands is that in between? So that number is in between 2,000 and 3,000. It's not in between 1,000 and 2,000 because it's bigger than 2,000. So it's in between 2,000 and 3,000. What number is halfway between 2,000 and 3,000? I'll give you a moment to think about that. Okay, so the number that's halfway between would be 2,500, right? So now once you get the halfway point, you can realize, well, this number is definitely less than 2,500, right? So it's closer. It would be about right here, I think, on the number line. So that number, if you round to the nearest 1,000, it would be closer to 2,000 than 3,000. Let's do to the nearest 10,000. Okay. So I like to always think whatever I'm rounding to the nearest 10, 100,000, I always like to count in my head by whatever number that is. So if you're rounding to the nearest 10, you think 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. What two tens is it in between? Or to the nearest 100, 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, and so on. To the nearest 1,000, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000. If we're rounding to the nearest 10,000, when you count by 10,000s, you would say 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, and so on. So if we wanted to round, let's do 15,781. So we want to round to the nearest 10,000. So we want to think about what are the two 10,000 numbers that would go on either end of the number line. What would the two numbers be that this is in between? So we know that the two 10,000s that this is in between 10,000 and 20,000, right? Because it's bigger than 10,000, but it's less than 20,000. So right in the middle would be 15,000. So is this number bigger than the halfway point, or is it smaller? It's bigger, right? It would be about right here, I think. So if you're rounding this number to the nearest 10,000, it would be closer to 20,000 than 10,000. Okay, so for the independent work today, there's always the first example is done for you. You're going to read the story problem, and it says to round each number, and then you multiply. Okay, so the first one says, Katie was reading a book with 51 chapters. If each chapter was 88 pages, which expression shows about the length of the book? So about means an estimate, right? So if you have 51 and 88, you want to round those to the nearest 10, right? So you know that 51, it's in between 50 and 60, but it's closer to 50. And 88 is in between 80 and 90, but it's closer to 90. So once you round, you're supposed to check the answer that shows the length of the book, and then you answer the problem. So 50 times 90 is 4,500. Okay, so you're going to round all of them. Then the second page has more story problems. You're going to read it really carefully, and you write an estimate to explain your thinking. And then you actually need to figure out how many pencils are there in 22 boxes. So the beginning is asking you to round, and then the second one is asking you to figure out the exact number. Okay. Same thing with the third page. Okay, you're going to estimate, and then you're going to actually find the answer. And then these pages, the first one's done for you. You're just going to round the first number to the nearest 100. It's telling you exactly what you need to round to. And then you multiply. So 215 is in between 200 and 300, but it's closer to 200. And then you multiply. Same thing with this page, but you need to round to the nearest 10. And then you multiply. So you need to round both of them to the nearest 10. Okay. And then the last page is just some fraction review. You're going to write each fraction in the appropriate box. All fractions in each box must be equal. So it's a little dark, but you'll see when you see it on your computer. You need to find all of the fractions that are equal to 1/2, and then you write it in the 1/2 box. Same thing with the 1/3, okay? And then you can check your answers in the answer key. Thank you to those of you who have done the math assessment already and emailed it back. We sent it to your families last Friday in the Ask Me About email, but I've only gotten about 6 or 7 assessments back. You have until Thursday to complete the assessment that we emailed your families, and then you either need to take a picture of it and email it to me, or if you have a scanner at home, you can scan it and just email it. But make sure you have only today and tomorrow to do your math assessment, okay? And then we'll go over it together on Friday in a video. Okay, that's all for today, 4E. Have a great Wednesday. I miss you.